You may remember this disturbing slideshow on TikTok telling you not to look up this photo where you are greeted by two eerie-looking parents, then their daughter, then a censored, gut-wrenching crime scene. This is the case of Lacey Fletcher, a woman who had melted into her couch.
When I walked in, the house smelled of a stench it smelled like a sewer.
Over a period of 12 years, Lacey's parents watched as their daughter faded away. But were they as helpless and innocent as they claim? The red flags suggest something more sinister was at play.
This case literally gave me the chills.
Now, in 2024, the criminal justice system has found new details that could conclude this real-life horror story once and for all. So, what exactly happened to Lacey Fletcher? Who did this to her? And, most importantly, why did they do it? It was the year 2022, in what appeared to be a peaceful, rural setting of East Feliciana Parish of Louisiana. There was a small town that was about to live up to its awful name, Slaughter. In this town, on Tom Drive, was a beautiful two-story ranch-style residence, home to 64-year-old Sheila Fletcher, 65-year-old Clay Fletcher, and their only child, 36-year-old Lacey. Just two elderly parents with their adult daughter. They must have been nice parents to let her live with them at this age, right? Well, the disturbing truth would be revealed on January 3rd, 2022. Yes, just 2 days after the new year, the mother, Sheila, dialed 911. She informed responders that her daughter had suddenly stopped breathing. Emergency personnel were sent out right away. Little did they know, they would be entering a house that would leave them mentally scarred for life.
When I got there, the officers, the first responders on scene were just in a daze.
There was Lacey Fletcher, bent on her side, in nothing but a shirt, deep into a 1960s style sofa. Her feet were crossed beneath her, and her underside was covered in ulcers and looked to have rotted to the bone. The hole in the couch that her body created was filled with urine and feces, like a makeshift latrine. Fecal matter was found on her face, chest, and abdomen. The weight of the bodily excretions was heavy enough for the very floor beneath the couch to buckle. Her hair was unbrushed, matted, and infested with maggots. Her very body was fused with the couch. Dr. U.L. Bickham, a coroner, who was called to look at the scene and perform Lacey's autopsy, described the awful smell of the scene.
The house smelled of a stench it smelled like a sewer, a septic tank, and also a smell of death. I've never smelled that in my life. I've dealt with decomposed bodies. I've dealt with all sorts of death, degradation, whatever. Never experienced this in all of my career.
The next thing he saw was Lacey's parents.
When I walked through the door, to the right of me in the kitchen, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were standing there. Clay was standing there emotionless. The mom had her head between her knees. I saw a tear or two.
Even as an experienced coroner, the scene was too heavy for Dr. Bickham, and years later, it was still a memory far too disturbing to recall.
To the left was the living room where Lacey was. I immediately went through there. I didn't stop and socialize with the parents. I went in there where Lacey was, and
Bickham recorded that the time of death happened at 3:07 a.m. on January 3rd, 2022, but also believed that Lacey may have been deceased up to 48 hours prior. As for the state that Lacey was found in, well, that led the coroner to suspect the daughter had been sitting in her filth for some time, approximately 12 years. It was a horrible scene, and the first thing the responders wondered was, why and how did this whole terrifying circumstance come to be? The Fletchers did their best to explain, but did their claims align with the evidence? The Fletchers alleged that Lacey was suffering from Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism spectrum disorder, and social anxiety to the extent that she refused to leave the living room, and subsequently, the couch. But how did that explain Lacey not moving around at all? Well, her parents claimed this was due to locked-in syndrome, a rare and serious neurological disorder that causes the body to experience paralysis, except for eye movement. The mind, however, is conscious, allowing Lacey to have thoughts, but the only way to communicate would be through blinking eye movements. This disorder is caused when a part of the brainstem is damaged, either from brain injuries, diseases, or medication overdose. They said that they tried to get her medical attention, but it was Lacey herself who refused, not wanting to leave the couch. The Fletchers asserted that they'd never neglected her. They claimed that they provided their daughter with meals and even a makeshift potty. Sheila Fletcher also made it a routine to clean the sores on her daughter's body, despite the fact that Lacey had never complained about them. The mother would even go home for lunch every single day to eat with and take care of her daughter. Yes, Clay and Sheila said that they loved Lacey to death. It was their daughter, the parents claimed, who made things difficult. Lacey wouldn't use the potty they supplied her with and instead opted for the couch or towel. She refused the food they served her. She seemed intent on living in conditions that would drive others to insanity. Still, Sheila tried, and every night she would sleep on the couch with her daughter. On January 2nd, a day before the incident, Sheila claimed that Lacey ate half a sandwich with Cheetos. The last time she saw Lacey alive was that night at 10 p.m., only to wake up and find her daughter deceased the next day. However, everyone and everything seemed to contradict their recollection of events, which begged the question, were the Fletchers lying? See, those who knew Lacey when she was young described her as a normal child. She played with the neighbors and went to school. She loved Disney movies and volleyball. A neighbor had described her as different from those her age, as she was more childlike than the rest, but she was smart. It was true that she was diagnosed with autism, but Lacey's mental condition, later on, worsened around the year 2000, when she was 14 years old. At that time, medical records proved that Lacey's parents took her to a psychologist, Dr. Donald Hopi, due to the development of her social anxiety. Dr. Hopi was able to confirm that Lacey's social anxiety was severe. Lacey's Asperger's had developed around 9th grade, around the time they pulled their daughter out of Brownfields Baptist Academy to put her under a homeschool program. From 2000 to 2002, she met with Dr. Hopi for 12 sessions, but he hasn't seen her since. Then, something unexpected happened. In 2010, Lacey allegedly refused to leave their living room, leaving her parents to return to Dr. Hopi without Lacey. They also said that she was urinating and defecating on the floor. Dr. Hopi advised them to consider hospitalization and provided steps to help Lacey, but the doctor never heard from or saw the Fletchers ever again. Needless to say, Lacey was never hospitalized nor treated. And while her autism diagnosis was real, the managing editor of The Age of Autism, Kim Rossi, wasn't satisfied with the parents' excuse. She said, autism has become very watered down as a diagnosis. What was keeping her on the couch? And why didn't the parents take advantage of the numerous resources available to them? Moreover, experts strongly questioned the claims that Lacey suffered from locked-in syndrome. Numerous professionals who worked with the disorder claimed that Lacey's alleged diagnosis had no validity. The coroner, Dr. Bickham, outright denied that Lacey had this condition, stating, "The only diagnoses I know she did have was first, social anxiety, severe autism, and that's it. Those are her only two diagnoses." Dr. Bickham further supported his claim by bringing up how her legs were positioned when he found her.
Talking about her legs being crossed, basically because of her condition, and this has been years, her legs were crossed because they were in contractures. What we call contractures, the muscles, tendons, bones just become so immobile from not being moved that they just stiffen and they stay that way. And she was like that in that position because she was in so much pain that she was trying to lift her body out of that hole because it hurt, it stung, it was horrible. She didn't have the energy to lift her body out of that hole.
Dr. Bickham didn't believe Lacey's parents when they said they never neglected her. In his eyes, the evidence spoke for itself, and even the parents' story of the events leading to Lacey's death didn't add up. Dr. Bickham's office was able to find out that Sheila and Clay Fletcher were actually away on a trip the weekend that Lacey died. And while they claimed she had half a sandwich and Cheetos to eat that night, there was no evidence of food or water anywhere near her or inside of her.
The only thing I saw was a small bag of hard candy, some type of like butterscotch or just candy, peppermint type candy, and that was it. That's the only nourishment she probably had, because I'll just not try to be too graphic, but in her stomach she had the yellow foam from the sofa and feces. So you take it from there.
In fact, every detail of the crime scene directly opposed all of the Fletchers' claims. If Sheila was taking care of her hygiene, why was Lacey's hair matted, knotted, and riddled with maggots? If Sheila even made attempts to feed her, but was challenged only by Lacey's refusal, why was Lacey going out of her way to ingest her own excrement and the couch foam? If the mother slept next to her daughter every night, how was she able to stand the maggots all over the couch and the putrid stench? Bickham even questioned if the Fletchers lived there at all. The stench in that house was unlike anything I've ever experienced, he said. There was no way anyone could stand even being in there, and I'm not sure the parents even lived there. And online, those who followed the case closely felt that the Fletcher story wasn't adding up.
The dispatcher again says, how old was she? She says 31. She was 36.
How do you not know your daughter's age?
And poking holes in the Fletcher story didn't stop there. I'm left with a multitude of seemingly simple to answer, yet still unanswered questions. Why was she naked? Why did they attempt to put a shirt on her despite already being deceased? Why was she covered in feces, including her face and hair, if not by her own doing? Why was the only thing she ate towards the end of her life only sofa cushion and feces? Why did her parents stop tending to her? It appears they did at one point, because it would have been impossible for her to survive on just sofa cushion for 12 years. Plus, I'd imagine she'd run out of sofa. Why did it all start at that age? Are the parents serious when they say she just stopped wanting to leave? It seemed also sudden. If it was a gradual onset of anxiety, surely it would have been like going outside was phased out. The photo of the couch is disturbing and could make some people feel nauseous. I can't imagine how any parents could allow their child to live in such a state, or how they could continue to live in a house with such a gruesome sight and smell. They want to paint the picture that they weren't unloving parents, but they were confused and tried their best. Not knowing better, I don't buy it for a second. There is no one who can corroborate any part of the story. There is a reason she stayed home. There was a reason they don't have visitors. I don't buy any part of this story. In fact, even those who knew the couple personally weren't sold on their version of events, or that they ever loved their daughter as much as they claimed. After all, Lacey's death had shocked the community, and not just because of the disturbing state she was found in.
Neighbors and friends say they never knew they had a daughter.
Yes, various people who had known the Fletchers were entirely unaware that they had a daughter, leading many to question, had Tom and Sheila been hiding Lacey?
I can tell you that we didn't know that they had a daughter until this happened.
Oh, okay.
And my husband worked shift work, and he saw everything at 3 o'clock in the morning.
And how long have you been a neighbor? So like you didn't even...
I've lived here 12 years.
So you've lived here 12 years, and this entire time you didn't even know there was a girl, a daughter that was living inside that home?
No.
Diana Fitzpatrick Logue was a caretaker that Sheila Fletcher hired for her mother, who was suffering from dementia. She was able to see firsthand how much effort Sheila would put into taking care of her loved ones, or at least the ones she wanted to. Diana said, Sheila was upset at the time she hired me because she felt the former caregiver had not treated her mother well, so she had cameras 24/7 to make sure she was watching me. Can you believe that? So much care for her mother and none for Lacey. Diana didn't even know Sheila had a daughter until she found a container with Lacey's name on it. No one from the family even mentioned her, except for Sheila's mother. In fact, despite having dementia, the grandmother asked about Lacey during one of her lucid moments. When caretaker Diana found out about Lacey's passing, she texted Sheila that it looked like the cameras were in the wrong house. Robert Blades, the Fletchers' longtime neighbor, knew about Lacey but had no idea she was still living at their house. The last time Robert saw her was 15 years before the ordeal. He remembered that the last time he saw her, she was thin but appeared normal.
I don't know, she just looked like a young woman. She was, she had these little, what do you call the little weights that you hold in your hand? The little dumbbells.
She was exercising?
Yes, she'd walk from her house around the circle, and she used to do that, you know, I don't know, 2 or 3 times a week.
Robert just assumed that Lacey must have moved on with her life. So, 5 years before the incident, Robert casually asked how Lacey was doing and whether or not she was at college. Lacey's father, Clay, responded by briefly explaining Lacey was still at home and she was fine. He then changed the subject. At the time, Robert had no reason not to take the father at his word, but after learning about Lacey's passing and the way she was found, the neighbor was shocked. He told the Daily Mail, "She was a sweet girl. I wouldn't even treat my dogs like that. I would have cried like a baby if I'd had seen her like that. That's just unspeakable." Still, Robert professed that he didn't expect this from Clay and Sheila Fletcher of all people, and he wasn't the only one. But what kind of people were the Fletchers, according to their friends and family? The couple was said to be regular attendants of the Baptist church near Zachary, Louisiana, and seemed to be good, upright members of the community. Sheila Fletcher used to be a police and court clerk in the city of Baker, and later on became the city prosecutor assistant in Zachary. She was also a part of Slaughter's board of aldermen for 4 years and had only quit 3 weeks after Lacey's body was found. Clay Fletcher was an officer for the Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting and expanding interest in the military, political, and history of the American Civil War. His colleague and the organization's director, John Potts, had worked with Clay for 6 years. John couldn't even fathom that Clay did this. But then again, he also didn't know that Clay had a daughter until her passing.
Shock, because it doesn't match with my experience of him. He's completely different than what you would expect someone like that to be.
Despite his initial good faith in the couple, Robert Blade believed that the only reason Sheila Fletcher made the 911 call was because she had no choice. He suggested one neighbor, though he doesn't know who, might have seen Lacey on the couch and told the Fletchers that they should call the police. But Robert said that that was all he knew and not much more. Robert's claims may be referring to the husband of the neighbor who was interviewed by News Nation, although there is yet to be definite confirmation. However, one thing was certain. The moment Sheila called emergency services was the moment the Fletcher's lies began. When Sheila Fletcher made that 911 call, the operator gave her instructions to perform CPR, and Clay Fletcher was the one to conduct the procedure. The call was able to pick up the sounds of Clay supposedly employing CPR on his daughter.
Are we doing compressions or on the couch? If we can't afford again, we can do compressions on the couch then. Are we doing compressions now? Yeah.
From that audio, it sounded like Clay was trying to do CPR, but retired forensic pathologist, former medical examiner, and former law enforcement, Dr. Michelle Dupree, didn't believe that they were doing CPR at all.
It was not CPR. It would be impossible to do CPR to Lacey in her condition. She was not able to even be stretched out. It would not be possible. That was not CPR.
But regardless of whatever anyone had to say about the Fletchers, Lacey's body exposed the truth about how they treated her. At the end of the investigation, Dr. Dana Troxclair, the chief forensic pathologist of the Jefferson Parish Coroner's Office, was able to determine the cause of Lacey's death. Lacey was suffering from chronic malnutrition, acute starvation, and severe chronic bone infection. From head to toe, her body was littered with stage 4 decubitus ulcers, some of which nurtured maggots. Her hair was so matted that Dr. Troxclair had to use a scalpel to untangle and cut the locks to perform the autopsy. Her body was also enduring kidney failure and a flattened tailbone due to the pressure of sitting for such a long period of time. Lacey's corpse weighed 96 pounds and was positive for COVID-19. Ultimately, however, her official cause of death was sepsis, a reaction to the state of her body. As for what was responsible for Lacey's state, become confirmed that this was thanks to the acute medical neglect that her parents inflicted on her. Within weeks of Lacey's discovery, Clay and Sheila Fletcher were arrested. In their talk with the detectives, Clay and Sheila maintained that their daughter was of sound mind and was able to make decisions on her own, blaming the victim for her own tragic predicament. This meant it was up to the court to decide what the truth was. But what exactly could the Fletchers be facing if found guilty? With all the evidence, Judicial District Attorney Sam D'Aquila had enough to summon a grand jury to formally charge Sheila and Clay Fletcher with second-degree murder due to their severe medical neglect. Generally, a second-degree murder charge is reserved for a murder that was committed with malicious intent, but not with premeditation. In the state of Louisiana, second-degree murder is considered a Class A felony. Those who are found guilty can be sentenced to life. An expert stated that a second-degree murder charge was unusual, as manslaughter or criminal negligence are the usual charges for cases of neglect such as this. But the state Lacey was founded may have influenced the pursuit of a more serious charge. D'Aquila, for one, believed that Lacey's parents wanted to kill her, which led to them being indicted on second-degree murder charges in early May 2022. Here you can see Sheila Fletcher walking out of jail. She was walking straight ahead, not making eye contact with anyone, and not one word was heard from her mouth. After 24 hours, Sheila walked out of jail for posting her bond with Clay, following about 12 hours later. The Fletchers then met with their attorney, Stephen Moore, to attempt to drop the second-degree murder charges, a motion that succeeded. Yes. On May 8, 2023, the Fletchers' defense attorney presented several mistakes that were made in the court's papers, like corrections on personal information, changed wording, layout modifications, and a missing signature from the grand jury foreperson, which is needed to make charges official. Due to the missing signature and lack of specific intent, this was enough for the judge to drop the charges. After that, the Fletchers still refused to speak to the press.
Can you explain why she was on that couch for 12 years? You have nothing to say?
However, District Attorney Tequila wasn't deterred. Despite the original charges being dropped due to mistakes, Tequila decided to charge the Fletchers again with the same crime. And, sure enough, on July 19, 2023, they were rearrested and re-indicted on second-degree murder charges. Tequila emphasized, "We will ensure there is justice for Lacey, and the public knows that caregivers will be charged for neglecting or abusing a person in their care." Clay and Lacey Fletcher spent a total of 18 months fighting to deny the second-degree murder charge, but the facts were against them. It was only at the last minute of their trial that they changed their tune. In February 2024, when the parents stood in the Louisiana court before District Judge Jones, they decided to give in to the consequences of their criminal actions. However, it wasn't for the charges that they originally faced. Instead of fighting against the second-degree murder charges, the Fletchers pleaded no contest to the charges of manslaughter. Their attorney had this to say.
The Fletchers had never had an intent to harm their daughter. The Fletchers played no contest to the manslaughter because there was no intent to harm their daughter. They were negligent. Yes, it is clear they were negligent. They loved her to death, and that is the true statement of the Fletchers. They loved their daughter to death.
Yes, the legal representative insisted that Fletcher's flaw was that they loved their child too much, just like other parents of handicapped children.
They loved their daughter to a fault. And sometimes that happens. Anyone with handicapped children can tell you those things can happen. These things, this is an extreme example of how that happens.
In other examples, according to American Bar, children on the autism spectrum are often abused physically and sexually. Some are physically abused by a parent or caregiver, usually because the adult cannot control the disabled child's behavior and resorts to violence in frustration. However, there are still parents out there that truly care for their autistic children and couldn't fathom with how the Fletchers treated Lacey. As a mom of a son with severe autism, no speaking, non-toileting, non-eating young adult, I can attest if he does not want to eat, he won't. However, I kept going through the hell of getting him to see many medical people, and after about a year and a half, we finally got him on a feeding tube. Some days he will eat a bit, but never enough to maintain life. It is an exhausting job. I don't quit because I love him. This broke me. My 2.5-year-old just got diagnosed, and as a mom, I fear for when it's my time to leave Earth, how he will be as an adult. Parents who hurt and neglect their kids are scum. And people diagnosed with autism were also hesitant to accept that this was just a case of simple neglect. As one Redditor wrote, "I keep rereading and studying the case. I'm autistic, high-functioning, with SPTSD and crap. I work in the neurology field myself, in particular, caregiving, and am well-versed in what could have happened at start, maybe, and I just keep coming back to abuse. No matter what, I mean. Factually, it was abuse and neglect, specifically abusive neglect. But I truly suspect something much more insidious to begin with. Mental illness definitely somewhere, but I think there was more aggressive, deeper abuse than passive neglect in the beginning, when she was still functional, until she was weakened enough. That poor girl never had a chance, and they had every resource possible. Soulless parents. I'm in the end of life part of neurology field, and a parent myself. I can't come to any other conclusion. Just can't accept that there's a way darker history to begin with. But while there was no undoing what had been done to Lacey, perhaps there was still a chance for justice to be served. After all, according to Tequila, this was an open and shut case.
It's very evident that Lacey Fletcher had some mental deficiencies. She was neglected by her parents. They didn't really show any direct intent to kill her, but their actions actually killed her.
With that very admission, what would be the court's decision? District Judge Jones said that Clay and Sheila Fletcher continually chose the path of least resistance when it came to the care of their daughter. This was a tragedy. The truth is that Lacey laid on a couch and slowly died because she got no medical or mental health care. District Judge Jones reached her verdict. Clay and Sheila Fletcher, without contest, were guilty of manslaughter. The couple was sentenced to 40 years in jail. However, they don't have to stay in jail for the whole 40 years. It turns out 20 of those years were suspended with 5 years probation upon release, meaning they must follow strict rules during those 5 years. If they break any rules, they might have to go back to jail to serve the suspended part of their sentence. But given that the couple were already in their mid-60s, there's no certainty that they'll still be alive by the time they get out of jail. But what was the public reaction to the verdict? Well, many remain unsatisfied, as comments from internet users included, 20 years is very little sentence for the monstrosity they did. They were torturing their own daughter for years. Some parents are from hell and deserve the chair for their cruel ways. They should suffer the exact same fate. Still, there were some, particularly the friends and family of the Fletchers, who thought the sentence was too severe. An associate pastor of the Arkansas Baptist Church, an old friend of the Fletchers, said, "I know that Clay and Sheila are strong people of good faith and follow Christ. It is the only way they have been able to love and care for Lacey all her life, as well as find strength to take one day at a time through the trials of these charges." Many of the Fletchers' loved ones also gathered at the courthouse that day and negatively responded to the judge's decision.
And once things wrapped up and we were heading outside, you could see many of the friends and family walk into their cars with tears pouring out of their eyes. A lot of the folks that were here today have known both of the Fletchers since they were in high school, so you can only imagine how that was for them.
Yet, whatever side you land on, there's a clear lesson to be learned from this case.
But the parish coroner said that today should serve as a wake-up call for anybody that has a family member with special needs.
After the hearing, Tequila implored the community, watch out for your friends, talk to your neighbors, and make sure this does not happen to anybody else. It's something that could have been prevented, if only it had been. While you're here, check out our videos about parents who have put their children in dangerous situations, like these TikTok moms, and consider subscribing to stay updated.